Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my beautiful hot messes. My name is Mistress Lavender, and today I'm reading Rich AF by Vivian 2. I'm on page 25 from where we left off. And if you don't know who I am, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And if you don't know what I'm reading, click episode 1, silly. But if you do, let's begin. Page 25. Home ownership has long been the bedrock of middle class wealth building. The most expensive investment a person makes and the one they count on to fund stability up until and well into retirement. Not being able to get in on that sucks, telling us to find a cheaper place. Not only isn't it a feasible short term solution, it's steering us away from the fundamental vehicle for assimilating wealth. For another thing, a house or apartment is a necessary physical structure that you can chuck your family in and protect yourself from the rain. Changing where and with whom we live with comes with an emotional and physical trade off that sometimes we're just not willing to make, nor should we be. And that's before we even get into the pain in the ass process of finding a new apartment, negotiating with the landlord, moving all your S, and hoping your roommates aren't annoying. In fact, sometimes it's actually worth spending more on housing. Case in point, when I was working trading hours on Wall Street, I had to be in my seat at 5:30 a.m. in the morning. I'd work until 6:30 or so at night, and then I leave for client evening events in the evening. Get home at 10 and 11, rinse, repeat. I was lucky that my commute was manageable enough that I didn't have too miserable of a subway ride there and back. But as soon as I was financially stable and my lease was up, I sprung for a new place that was closer to work and more expensive. Why? Because I was tired and I knew I couldn't run on fumes forever. If I stayed in that cheap apartment, eventually the commute and the long hours would have grounded me. I've I've had gotten physically and mentally exhausted faster than I should have for someone my age. And eventually I'd maybe even burn out so hard I simply couldn't do the job anymore. Sure, I'd be saving on rent, but it'd come with at a real cost. Meanwhile, I was watching the analysts who lived closer to the office than I did. With a shorter commute, they were able to get more sleep, show up early, and generally just look like they were more dedicated to the job. Essentially, they were seen as better employees. And for what? Because they had more money to spend on rent. Compare that with someone who's coming in from generational poverty, maybe someone who needed to send money home to the family. They know they cannot spend all their money on rent because that support is non negotiable. So they either decide that they're going to sacrifice an additional 45 minutes of sleep, which you're not getting much of anyways, working those hours, and they're going to show up slightly later and be seen as a less good employee. Finally, who's to say I don't have roommates? Literally, about 1 in 10 young people live completely solo. The rest are bunking with roommates, partners, spouses, or yes, parents. 1 in 3 adults aged 18 to 34 still lives at home. Just spend less on lattes and avocado toast. Short answer, it ain't the avocado toast, babe. Long answer, short term small investments aren't making or breaking our financial lives and keeping us from achieving our goals the way most financial gurus want you to think they are. For one thing, you might look at these numbers and be like, F it, I'm never going to afford all this stuff anyways. So I'm at least going to buy myself a nice brunch once in a while, which is a pretty valid response. Although, as well as we'll see, you can actually work towards those bigger things, buying without feeling totally hopeless. But more on that later. But for another thing, the reason so many expenses these days, small, big, and everything in between, feel so much more out of our reach than we've been taught they should is because, well, they are thanks to inflation. You've probably heard about inflation generally, but if you can't explain it in a nutshell, don't sweat. This conniving force of darkness is pretty simple at a basic level. Inflation refers to the gradual increase in prices over time. In practice, this generally means you'll be paying more than you previously did for that same item or service. You've probably seen this happen in your lifetime. Think of the movies you've seen over the years, the tickets you bought to see Robert Pattinson as a sparkling vampire in Twilight. No judgment. Probably cost less than the one you bought to see Robert Pattinson in the kick ass in Batman 14 years later, right? 14 years? Damn. Inflation inflation in general can be tracked at a macro level, averaging out all the price increases across different sectors of the economy. So, movie tickets, but also gas, groceries, industrial goods, that kind of thing. When the general price level rises, each unit of money buys fewer goods and services, and thus there is a reduction in the purchasing power of money. Pretty simple. The problem comes when inflation gets out of hand, when average prices go up faster than the average wages are going up. In other words, economists generally consider a rate of around 2% a year to be healthy and indicative of an economy that's growing steadily. Negative inflation or deflation is actually its own kind of bad news. More than that, though, can be bad news. And lately, that's just what's been happening. The still ongoing aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic that cost tons of companies, banks, and manufacturers by surprise, the sporadic supply chain issues that keep cropping up, the labor market wilding out as people are laid off, retire early, and come out of retirement, and the general instability of it all to have contributed to the inflation we see now, making stuff more expensive than it used to be. Just relax. Money can't buy happiness. Money can't buy happiness anyway. False. So false. Falser than you ever think. Back in 2010, there was a pretty famous study you might have heard of regarding money and happiness. Basically, it concluded that people's happiness increased in lockstep with their income, but only up to a certain point, around 70,000 per year, which is around 90,000 in today's dollars. After that, it leveled off. People love to throw this facetoid around because it kind of has its cake and eat it too. It essentially meant money could buy happiness because it provided basic necessities and stability. But also, the billionaires weren't much happier than the rest of us. Well, I hate to break it to you, but new study just dropped. A 2021 study entitled Experience Well-Being Rises with Income Even Above 70,000 per year founded that the 75,000 figure is absolute baloney. Yeah, even adjusted for inflation. Turns out happiness continues to increase well past that threshold. And I quote, there was no evidence of income threshold at which experience and evaluative well-being diverged, suggesting that higher incomes are associated with both feeling better day to day and being more fascinated with life overall. Preach, well, let's go deeper. Because just relax impractically isn't simply empirically SC advice. It's advice that ignores our lived reality. The years in which we've come of age have seen crazy amounts of what are these words? Cataclysmic once in a lifetime events that destabilize markets, even before most of us had jobs and were earning our own cash. We existed in a world that was continuously getting turned upside down. You didn't need to be an adult with a stock portfolio to see that 9/11, the Iraq War, the 2008 housing crisis, Brexit, COVID-19, the January 6th insurrection, the FTX fiasco, and the 2023 collapse of major regional and national banks had massive, unavoidable events on the way we live. In fact, because we were young when many of these things happened, they taught our impressionable kid and teenage and 20 something brains some truths about the world. It's volatile, it's scary. It could all be ripped away in a split second. Sure, just relax was good advice once. Boomers and some older Gen Xers got to live their prime earning years through a bull market, aka where the line goes up to the straight right and the economy is doing well. Back then, as long as you participated in the stock market and bought a divisional portfolio, you won. But anyone born from the 90s onward lived through collective trauma, economic and otherwise. The ideas we've been taught about how the market works do not match with our lived reality of how the market actually works. Call us coddled or sensitive snowflakes or whatever, but this S was real for us. Bottom line, it's okay to feel a little bit spooked and unsure, and it's okay to want to have money. Just stop choosing to be poor. Ugh, I hate this one. Maybe it's just my For You page, but I feel like I've scrolled past so many celebrities and influencers talking about how being broke is a choice, which is effing idiotic thing to say. For one thing, medical bankruptcy, which was unheard of a generation ago, is now the leading cause of bankruptcy in the US. I don't have to tell you that this is super effed up, but I will. It's effed up. Who would ever make the choice to run up a sky high hospital bill? No one chooses to have a kidney stone or a seizure the way people choose to run up credit score debt at Sephora. These folks end up broke, probably sick, and judged by the internet randos by their choices. For another thing, it's actually more expensive to be poor. Covering ongoing costs with stopgap cheaper options can actually cost you more in the long run, and you don't have a choice. For example, when I worked at JP Morgan, I had to wear pantyhose to meet the dress code. After food, rent, and other necessities, the best I could afford were these cheapies that come in a little cardboard boxes at Walgreens for $6.99. These pantyhose sucks, y'all. I'd wear each pair two, maybe three times before hangnail snagged one of the legs and the hole appeared in the crotch. Or they just got one of those mysterious out of nowhere runs, so I have to buy more. Over about 6 months, I went through 13 pairs of those suckers, aka just about $91 worth of pantyhose. Meanwhile, a pair of Woodford sheer nude hose from Saxon Avenue, which would last me a solid 6 months or more if I was careful, cost $60. Except I never had $60, not all at once. This was my whole ass clothing budget for the month, and I needed other stuff that skirts that fit and shoes weren't worn down to the heel peg. So I was stuck buying leggings at $6.99 a pop because I did have $6.99. I was overpaying in the long run, but not because I was making bad choices, but because I was too cash strapped to have an alternative. If you've ever read Terry Pratchett's Disco World series, you might be familiar with Captain Samuel Vime's observations about cheap boots versus expensive boots. I was basically living out my own version, but with pantyhose. When people are actually in a cycle of paycheck to paycheck brokenness, it's not that they don't want to get out of the situation. They do. They want to make the right choices. The problem is that there are factors working against them: exhaustion, illness, a lack of time, a lack of resources, and a lack of role models. Urgency, timing, convenience, and limited options can squeeze us into paying more over the long term. And that's before we get into the things like predatory pay loans, credit card interest, or the fact that high ticket items from phones to laptops are now basically designed to stop working every 5 years. So, no, being broke is not a choice, and overcoming brokenness is not easy. But you got me, your rich BFF, to help you what to do. Why race, gender, and diversity are important to acknowledge. I can't just wrap up this chapter on the note of, yeah, it's harder now than it used to be. For some people, it's always been hard. For some people, the money traumas and systematic and generational. Oh, for some people, the money traumas are systematic and generational. So many groups like women, POC, and the LGBTQ community have simply not had the equal opportunities to build wealth. Because real talk, when most people think of a rich person, they probably picture a white guy, whether it's Warren Buffett or Elon Musk. But this is not because white guys are better at stuff. In fact, they are the ultimate tutorial mode players. They just had it easier. They're not being politically correct or whatever. It is facts. Here's a quick history lesson. The abolition. On that note, I'm gonna stop. I'm on page 32. Still on chapter part one, I think. But yeah, I'm so happy you're reading it with me. Excuse my mess ups, but honestly, I don't care. I'm gonna get better, and I just have a lot of saliva in my mouth. But I'm enjoying this book. I love it. It's kind of in how she speaks is kind of like my age group, I guess. So it's like relatable in a sense. So I enjoy it and I appreciate it. But yeah, I hope you're reading something too. And let me know if you're reading as well. But I'll see you next video. We're on page 32. Bye. My name is Mistress Lavender. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.